The Lord be with you. Oh, let's try that again. The Lord be with you. There we go. It is good to be in the house of the Lord this morning. We are excited that you are here. This is our third week in our African American Religious Biographies class. I have been so blessed by everything that Dr. J. Case has brought the last 2 weeks, and I trust that you have been as well. We are very excited this morning that we are welcoming a new teacher for us, Andrea Ramsey. She is new to this class, but she's not new to our community. She's been a part of the Be the Bridge group, and so several of you who've been a part of that know her through that group. She also serves as the assistant pastor at Zion's Temple Church in Northeast Canton, right? 7th Street, Northeast Canton. And then she doesn't sleep because she's also full-time at Malone as the Director of Multicultural Services. So we are honored that she took time out of her very busy schedule to be here this morning. And today she is going to be talking about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. I knew it was T&T, I just couldn't remember which ones. And so let us go to God in prayer as we prepare to welcome Andrea. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift that is this day. We pray that you would open up our hearts to receive all that we have to learn this day. In this hour and the next hours of worship, we pray that your Holy Spirit would come and fill us, guide us, lead us, inspire us, and challenge us. And that these saints that we ponder today, that their lives may be a testament to your work in and through them, that we, with your Spirit in us, may be inspired and challenged to grow and to know your saints, people that you have called along similar paths. And may we be inspired today, and may we grow in faith and closer to you in this hour. Be with our teacher and help her in all that she has to present and bring to us. And we ask that you may be glorified in this hour, Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we say together, Amen.
That's good. Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Can you give me a little bit more energy? Good morning, everyone. All right. So I may be a little bit different from some of your other presenters. I've been teaching for a long time. I like some interaction from the crowd, and a lot of times, at Malone, when we have people who are African American descent, they get up and say, we need you to talk back to me this morning. So there's that call and response expectation. But I am very honored to be here to share time with you. And I'm really excited to talk about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, two wonderful African Americans that have done so many things. And it's really exciting and inspiring. It is exciting and inspiring to understand their courage and their commitment and their strength and their faith. And that's what we're here to talk about. But before we jump into those two, I want to do a little review with you. So who remembers who we talked about last week? Frederick Douglass, correct. And so we had the honor at Malone to have a little opportunity to preview Frederick Douglass and also Harriet Tubman, some documentaries that were done. And so we got a chance to do that. And I want to give you a little clip in review. So we'll review who we learned about last week. And this is about maybe 2 minutes or maybe 1 minute long. So Frederick Douglass.
In the summer of 1841, a grand anti-slavery convention was held in Nantucket. I was induced to express the feelings inspired by the occasion and the fresh recollection of the scenes through which I had passed as a slave.
The abolitionists that were there knew that they had this fugitive slave in the audience, and they asked Frederick, will you tell the audience what it was like to be enslaved?
What shall I say of this experience? I have seen the cruelty and brutality of slavery, and I had been subjected to the depths of slave life. I was a graduate from this peculiar institution, with my diploma written on my back.
More Americans heard Douglass speak than any other American in the 19th century with the possible exception of Mark Twain. And it was significant that a former slave was famous.
Frederick Douglass understood the power of his literature as a tactic of liberation. A man born enslaved who rose to become a man of growth, of self-mastery.
Frederick Douglass has a very clear idea of what becoming means. He is becoming an orator, he's becoming a world leader, he's becoming a statesman. And for him, becoming is an ever unfolding process that he sees as self-creation.
Okay, so I wanted to share that with you just in review. And a couple things I want to accent that you heard just now is about becoming. And so it's very interesting that the people we're talking about were slaves themselves. They were able to lift themselves up, to figure out how to enter into society and be able to talk about the pain of their experience and do that in a very strong and courageous way, even while they were still struggling, okay, to be accepted, to get the things that they needed. And so that's what Frederick Douglass did. And he is a contemporary of Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. So I just wanted to reflect on him for a minute and then also talk about our next two people. I lost my slide there somewhere, I think. Oh, I actually wanted to preview that one later. Can you take me back to, I can go back myself, can I? Okay, that was in review. Okay, so we're going to talk today about Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman. Is that okay with you? Okay. These two ladies, as I mentioned, were contemporaries of Frederick Douglass, and I wanted to call them women of valor. That's not a term you normally hear associated with women. Usually people say they were men of valor. Okay, but these were women of valor because they were very valiant. They were tough. They were courageous, and they served in many vocations during their lifetime. And so, yes, they are women of valor. So first of all, we want to talk about Sojourner Truth. And one thing that these two ladies also have in common is that they both changed their names at some point. And so you'll see on the next slide that her original name was not Sojourner Truth. Her original name was Isabella Baumfree. She was born into a family, and it's not sure because a lot of times when we're talking about records of people who were part of slavery, the records are very sketchy, even to the degree that it's not clear always what year they were born or what day. But she was born into a family of as many as 12 children, they believe. Born around 1797 in Ulster County, New York. She was the daughter of enslaved people, obviously. Her father was James Baumfree. He was from Ghana. And her mother was Elizabeth Baumfree from Guinea. And so Isabella Baumfree, the original name of Sojourner Truth, she was sold away from her family at age 9. And so we don't say these things lightly. You know, when you read someone's biography or their autobiography, when you really think about what that means, and we'll find the same true for Harriet Tubman, being sold away, you're a child, you are taken away from your family and then forced to work for people that you don't know that also abuse and beat you. That's very serious at age 9. And so she lived that life as a slave, as a child slave, until she grew into adulthood, into womanhood, and again, frequently, you know, in her speeches and in her autobiography, she recounts the pain and the tragedy and the difficulty of that life that we know about. As a grown woman, she was able to marry Thomas, and she had 3 children. For a total of 5 children. She had a daughter from a previous relationship, and she lost an infant son along the way as well. So she was actually the mother of 5, actually 4 children that she was able to birth and not necessarily interact with on a full-time basis, again, because of being a slave. She escaped at some point with her infant daughter, escaped slavery in 1826, and later her son Peter, he had been left behind. But when she escaped with her daughter, she discovered at some point that Peter had been illegally sold to a man in Alabama. So there were some guidelines around when liberation came, freedom came, or prior to that as well, they started making some guidelines about things that could and could not be done. And one of those things was that children should not be sold away to the South. But this actually happened to her son, Peter. And so she actually, with the help of some people that were looking at her case and wanted to support her, and this was pretty much unheard of, she actually took the case to court, and she won the fact that she was able to get her son back. She won her case. Her son was free to return to be with her in the North, and that was one of the first successful cases of a black woman challenging a white man in court and winning. That's powerful. That's powerful, to have the nerve to actually follow through, to stand up, to go to court, and to be able to sit there and know that, coming from the background she came from, that she had her day in court and she actually won. So that is very noteworthy. Some of the causes that she supported were obviously abolition. She was a very well-known abolitionist. She went around and spoke, shared information, challenged people in her speeches, as you'll see. She was an advocate for women's rights and had the opportunity to work with some of the well-known women of the women's rights movement. They had a little bit of disagreement as they went along because, of course, she was trying to work for freedom for African American people to have the rights that they deserved, in addition to working for women's rights. And so they got into a little bit of a scuffle sometimes with some of that, because Elizabeth Cady Stanton and some others that were pushing forward, Susan B. Anthony, they were all for women's rights, but they're in some of the background conversations, it got kind of sticky, okay? Because there was still that issue of African American people needing to have their rights. And then there were also challenges and issues because, as she was working for abolition, she was all about getting women's rights and rights for African Americans, and not so much for maybe some of the other people that were saying that it was okay for the men to have the same rights, but not necessarily the women. Lots of discrepancies and controversies. So universal suffrage, that's what I was just speaking about. And I didn't know this, I learned this in my research, that she had done some work around prison reform way back then. We're still working for prison reform, right? But she was working on behalf of prisoners way back then. And then near the end of her life, she was trying to talk to people in government, and she did have the opportunity to meet President Lincoln at one point, but working for land grants for African American people, because she realized that due to the way things had evolved in the past historical times, that she felt there should be some reparations. They didn't call it that then, but that's what it was. And so she was working diligently for that cause as well. So I just want you to look at that slide for a minute. That's a lot of stuff for one woman. And of course, some of those issues are still going on today. We might call them something different, but it's really the same work. I said amazing facts, and so I have a slide of amazing facts. And one is that, and I felt this way as well, since we started this class, talking about African Americans writing books about their lives. And think about that. Times of discrimination, times of prejudice, but having the skill and will. Am I forgetting to put your slides? Oh, I got them. You're advancing for me because you can see clearly. I was just paying attention to this. Thank you for that. The skill and will to sit down and write about your life. And the challenge of that is your life was very tragic. So reliving and painstakingly writing about the painful things that happened to you, and then living and going around and talking about and sharing your story, and we love that. People share their stories, but there's still trauma in sharing your story because you're telling about the terrible, deleterious things that happened to you during your lifetime. But I think it's an amazing fact that these African Americans were able to write about their lives. And so in 1850, Sojourner Truth had the narrative published, the narratives of Sojourner Truth, a Northern Slave. Okay, and that's a whole thing too. And that's one of the things that we were talking in previous classes about what we learned in school. I'm not sure that we learned in school very much about slavery in the North. I think that a lot of times we kind of knew it. I don't think there was emphasis placed on that. And so still today you have children and teens that don't realize that there were slaves in the North, because the way that it's being taught is that, oh, that was in the South, and so the slaves were picking cotton, and they were, which is true, but the de-emphasis on the fact that even though the North was very helpful in changing what happened with slavery, there were active slaves in the North, okay? And so that is why she put that emphasis on a Northern slave. And that book was published by William Lloyd Garrison, who, of course, was part of the movement as well, a big part of the movement. So Sojourner Truth's speech on May 1851 in Akron, Ohio, Ain't I a Woman? And I hope you've heard of this before, but it was right here in Ohio, which makes me feel pretty happy, at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention. And so I want to share that, the text of this speech with you. And so picture me representing Sojourner Truth as she stood to deliver this speech, and was known to wear long Quaker dresses, very conservative, very modest, with a white shawl. And most of the time when you see her, as the pictures that I've shown of her so far, a big white bonnet. But this is what I love about her. And so Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman? This was delivered in 1851. And also know that this was delivered as part of a group of speeches. So she got up after some other speakers had spoken. And so you'll hear in the speech that she refers to other people in the room. And she just kind of walks up to the podium and begins. Well, children, where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. Now, I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? Now that man over there, he says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into any carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man can get ahead of me. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? They ask about this thing in the head. What's this they call it? Intellect. Yeah, that's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? Now, if my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, now wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? And then that man in black right there, he says that women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did he come from? From God and a woman. And the man had nothing to do with them. Now, if the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women, they ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now that they's asking to do it, well, the men better let them. Now, I'm obliged to you for hearing me. And now, old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say. That was her speech again at 1851. Very strong language, very spirited, in a room full of people that didn't necessarily look like her, and I love that speech. Now, there's a problem with this speech because in research, unfortunately, there's some controversy regarding this speech. It says that there are two different versions of the speech, and you find this, and that it was first published by Francis Gage in 1863, 12 years after the speech itself. And then another version was published a month after the speech was given, and it says, in the Anti-Slavery Bugle by Dr. Marius Robinson. And in Robinson's version, the phrase, ain't I a woman, is not present. So 2 versions. I don't really care if it was in there the first time because I like that version. I'm just going to tell you how I feel, okay? So I like that version. It adds flavor and emphasis, but I wanted to make sure that I stated that there is some controversy. Did she actually say, oh, that ain't I a woman? It's unclear, but it sure sounds good with it in there. That's what I want to say. So that's great. And if you have an opportunity to look that up, and listen to it, other people listen to it and really look at the text of it, it's pretty powerful. Wanted to share with you another exciting piece of information that there is a historical marker you can see in the upper left corner there of the site of Sojourner Truth's speech on women's rights. The old stone church where she actually delivered that speech has since been torn down, but there is a marker there. But the exciting thing is that currently there is work going on, and that is a rendering for Truth Plaza that will be in Akron, Ohio, and I believe it's supposed to be finished in 2023. And the Memorial Plaza will be the first historic site in the state of Ohio that recognizes the contributions of a Black woman in American history. So I'm excited about that. So maybe we'll take a trip there when it finishes, when it's completed, so that we can see that. So good stuff for Ohio with regard to Sojourner Truth. Other vocations and contributions that she had: she was a domestic worker. She did quite a bit just cleaning people's homes. And sometimes as she traveled, that was the way that she would make her living, by working for people. And she also spoke, of course. She was a recruiter of Black men for the Civil War. And that was something that also Harriet Tubman got involved in doing, because there was some reluctance, as you might understand, of people, of Black men wanting to go fight in the war for many reasons. And so she tried to rally the troops and get people to be a part of that. And she was also a contributor to the National Freedmen's Bureau. So lots of things that she did in addition to speaking and letting people know about her and being an author. With regard, and this is exciting too. Sojourner Truth died on November 26th of 1883. There are many memorials that exist in her honor around the country. There are schools named after her, just many things. If you go to many different states, you'll find things. And even here in Ohio, we'll have Truth Plaza soon, and so I'm excited about that. There is a historical marker at her grave in Battle Creek, Michigan. So she did move to Michigan and take up residence there. So there's a marker there where her family settled, and she lived for a while. And then in 2009, a bust was placed in the Capitol Visitor Center in Washington, D.C., which again was the first of an African-American female. And that's a picture of the bust. There are a lot of pictures, if you search online, that you can see of the bust and Michelle Obama involved in the presentation of that. So that is the short story of Sojourner Truth. And, you know, in reading her biography and reading about her, autobiographies about her, I'm leaving out a lot of the descriptions of pain, okay? Lots of tragedy with regard to her being a mother. I didn't talk about that very much. I talked about how many children she had, but trying to watch over her children, take care of her children, and even, you know, going to court to defend her child was a large part of the things that she did. And so sometimes when we talk about women, we don't want to de-emphasize the fact that they are wives and mothers. And so they're out there fighting for freedom and being in the marketplace and doing the things that they're doing. But they're also taking care of their children in their homes. And they're also dealing, in this case, as will be the same with Harriet Tubman, with a lot of tragedy and a lot of loss. And so I want us to think about that just for a moment, about what some of the challenges were along the way. And being a woman, and being ostracized and sometimes talked about by African-American men and other men alike, because there was the feeling that, number one, you shouldn't be up speaking and saying anything, point blank, period, over and out. And then to have the audacity to stand up and talk about things that are counter-culture and be very bold and very strong is a whole nother issue. So this is something that I think when I go back to my courage and commitment statement, it's very heartfelt when I think about that. And I think that her example is very important. And I also think that these are not things that are unlike today, because there is still some of that thinking that women should not be preaching and teaching and standing up and advocating. So I don't want us to leave that part behind as we continue to reflect. I want to pause to see if anybody has anything they want to say or any questions they want to ask now before we go forward. Okay, I see your hands back there. I think he's trying to bring you a mic. That's okay. Making sure everybody can hear you. You can, go ahead. Go ahead. You can talk really loud. Oh, I didn't say that. I should have said that. I apologize. She changed her name because she said she wanted to go about and preach and teach about the truth. And so that's why she changed her name to Sojourner Truth, because it was her desire to go about and actually be a missionary. And you know, she preached as well. She was a preacher. So that's why she changed her name. Thank you. That was a great question. The question was, why and how did she change her name? Yes, sir. I don't know if she escaped with the group. I know she left the rest of her children where she was previously. So it was like she escaped. She only took the baby with her. And then that's when, wherever she was at that time, word got to her that her son had been sold off to the south. So she ran away with her child. And again, that was part of what I was alluding to, the trials and tribulations, that you couldn't necessarily just have everybody with you and do what you needed to do. And that's what happened to her, unfortunately. Yes.
Didn't you say she had 11 children?
Right. Now, and that's also a discrepancy. In some of the research, it says 11, some it says 13.
Well, I wondered about that, because children were a monetary value to the slave owners, and were those women encouraged to have children? And
absolutely. Yeah, it was a way to fulfill the opportunity to have people working for you. So yes, the question was, were the women encouraged to have children? Yes, that was part of the responsibility, I hate to say, but yes, to make more people to work. Okay, and we know historically that some of the children were birthed in relationships with other slaves. Some were birthed in relationships by slave masters, and others who took advantage of the women, because the goal was to populate your business. Exactly. And also, you know, population for the work, but also population for, if you chose to sell slaves, then that was also income, because they were property.
Obviously, she was with her husband quite a bit, but how did he move with her to Michigan, and how long did her marriage last?
No, so there aren't a lot of records about that. There's very little record about some pieces of her marriage, but again, those children are not necessarily all by her husband because of what we just said. So that is not fully clear through what the research that I read. So when we think in terms of women who were slaves, it's unclear. And it may have been unclear to them at some pieces of time. I'm going to say that as well. Who are the fathers of the children, okay? But some, yes, with, you know, her husband. But again, because the records are sketchy, I mean, her story is her story. So if you read it, you can pick up some of those pieces, but then I'll say again, in some of the retelling, it may not be a continuous story per se, all right? So there's maybe some choices to emphasize and de-emphasize some pieces of the pain and trauma. Yeah.
So her lifestyle, her travel in particular, all that takes money, all that takes resource. I know not Jefferson Davis, that name's going to elude me.
Thomas Jefferson?
How did she finance it?
Right, so that was back to the domestic work, the preaching and teaching that she did.
All came from that.
And odd jobs. And then she had some white people who helped kind of finance her. So when I alluded to the fact that she took that case to court, she had some people that were actually supporting her to be able to, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Could I add a little quick story?
Yes.
I shared this with you.
Please do.
But as I talked about a few weeks ago, kind of the genesis and the inspiration for this whole class, I participated in the African American Religious Autobiographies Conference and Symposium up at Grand Rapids, Michigan. And while in Michigan, we did a pilgrimage over to Detroit, and we stopped in Battle Creek, Michigan. And so on a Sunday morning in July, we gathered and had a little worship service at Sojourner Truth's grave. And she is most well known with relation to Frederick Douglass, and one of her catchphrases, which we didn't touch on today. We only have 30 minutes, right? We could be talking about her all year and still not get it all. But as I understand the story, with Frederick Douglass, and he was given a lecture and essentially said that God had abandoned African Americans. And Sojourner Truth stood up and said, "Is God dead? Oh, right. Is God dead?" And she was challenging Frederick Douglass. And sure enough, that phrase, "Is God dead?" is on her grave. Her name, her birth and death dates, and "Is God dead?" And it was a challenge, right? It's not like the idea that God is dead, right? It's a challenge. No, God is not dead. And then we sang, I won't sing it now, but then we sang a song that's "God is not dead. He is alive," right there at the grave to honor Sojourner Truth. And that memory will always stick with me. It was a beautiful thing. I just had to share.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, there were some things I read in Frederick Douglass's writings of the challenge of Sojourner Truth with him regarding faith. So a man of faith, not probably as strong as Harriet and Sojourner. I'm just going to say that. Okay. And so she challenged him and openly also about that. So thank you for sharing. Yes.
Legal or free or whatever?
Oh, because slavery was abolished then. Okay, so there were different times that different states acted. So she did escape, and she escaped, I think, not too much before it actually became outlawed. So yeah, and that's just interesting, and that's a great question too. So yeah, when it was actually abolished where she was, then that's when she became free. All right, Sojourner Truth, there's so much more we could say, and I encourage you to look her up. Biography.com is a great source of information, and they usually have a lot of pictures and also videos. So if you want to learn more about her, I would encourage you to do that. And I will remind us when I hear of Truth Plaza opening, because I think we should go there. All right. So I'm going to transition to Harriet Tubman now. And that is a picture of Harriet Tubman that I had not seen before when I started researching. There are a couple of pictures that are real popular of Harriet. That was one in her younger years. It's a very beautiful picture, but I wanted to be sure to share that because that is her in her younger years. And so I want to do a preview now of Visions of Freedom with regard to Harriet Tubman. That'll give you a little preface on her life. It's only about a minute and a half. And these are all on PBS.
Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go.
She would hear voices, she would hear singing, she would see fire burning, or she would hear water rushing.
She would have very, very vivid dreams of her flying over fields as a free woman.
God's time is always near. He set the North Star in the heavens. He gave me the strength in my limbs. He meant I should be free.
She was a very small woman. She was no larger than 5 feet tall, but she was able to escape and free 70 or more persons back and forth, knowing that each and every time she was risking her life and risking the lives of those persons that she brought with her.
Harriet Tubman is famous as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. but she was also a leading abolitionist, a friend of some of the most powerful men and women, reformers and radicals of her day, a suffragette, a spy, a scout. She was a Civil War soldier.
One of the things that Harriet believed in is that God didn't mean for anybody to be a slave. Freedom should be universal. It should be universal.
Amen. It should be universal. I want to say that again. Harriet Tubman. And I'm showing you these little previews because I'm hoping that you're going to go to PBS and watch the entire documentaries. Both of them are about 54 minutes. You can just go in there and search on Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, and I encourage you to do that. It's very inspiring, so I hope you'll take time to do that. So Harriet Tubman, with regard to her family, she was born, again, we're guessing a little bit, between 1820 and 1825 in Maryland. She was the daughter of enslaved people. Father was Ben Ross. Mother Harriet Ritt was her nickname, Green. And so her original name, and I told you that they both changed their names, was Araminta Harriet Ross. That was her given name. And she began serving as a slave as a child as well. Some of her siblings were sold away from her family, which fractured their family. So she lost some of her siblings. She was initially, when she was a very small child, assigned to be a house slave. So she did a lot of serving to her mistress, family, as young as age 5. And so that's very young. So she knew, again, pain, trauma at a very young age, and abuse as well. As she grew into her adult womanhood, she married John Tubman, which is where she picked up the Tubman name, and he was a free man. She married him in 1844, so she had married him. She was still enslaved and not free. Any children that they had were not mentioned, as they were slaves as well, so there's no real record of children between her and John Tubman. Now, this is the part I almost hate to talk about because it's so traumatic when I read it. Her marriage to John Tubman ended after one of her trips. She came back, she thought, to get him. And so and if you can read this in the book, it's very traumatic, but it explained how she had been traveling. She, ran away, took this group of slaves to the north, came back thinking she was going to get John, and he was going to come and go with her north. But he had taken another wife. And then when it was described in the book, and if you don't know about Harriet Tubman, she used a lot of disguises sometimes because, of course, she was traveling at night and in the dark and didn't want to be recognized. And also I'll mention that she had an injury to her forehead, and it's mentioned later in the slides as well. But she was in a situation where she was with a group of people. One of the slaves was trying to escape and ran across the path of where she was, and one of the slave masters threw a 2-pound weight trying to hit the person that was running, and it hit her in the head and made a gash in her forehead. So a lot of times when you see her, she has that turban on, and that's one of the ways of de-identifying herself, is wearing that turban so that mark is not visible. But she had, on this particular occasion, when she was coming back to her home with her, I'm going to say so-called husband, she was dressed like a man. Okay, and so she went to the house, knocked on the door, and his wife that he had taken opened the door and just laughed right in her face. And that is so tragic. I mean, I think I really cried when I read that in the book the first time. And so she did not understand what had happened, of course, and so, of course, that broke up. There was the breakup with him because of what he had done. Later, she married Nelson Davis, who was a Civil War veteran, in 1969, and they adopted a daughter named Gertie. And that's pretty much all we know about her family life. Faith focus. You saw in the preview, and that was why I wanted to show that to you, that it talks about her having visions. A lot of times she would record about visions that she would have of herself flying or seeing the Lord, and he was speaking to her through nature, through the stars, through visions that she had. But she makes very frequent references to her faith almost in everything that she says and does. And it focuses and centers on God's provision and his protection and his command of the stars and the forces of nature. And through those forces of nature, that she sees God. You know how sometimes we talk about God in everything and God in every moment? That's sort of her take on it. But she also acknowledges that it is under his guidance and leadership and authority that she is moving and having her being and helping to save people's lives, literally. Couple quotes. God's time is always near. He gave me my strength, and he set the North Star in the heavens, and he meant I should be free. And I like that picture of her. That's one thing we mentioned also when we were talking about Frederick Douglass last week, the fact that they took advantage of the opportunity to be photographed. But most of the time when you see these people, they're not smiling, okay? They mean business. And so I love that because it gives you a certain strength when you look at their photos. This is serious, okay? There's no time for what we call skinning and grinning. I don't know if you know that phrase or not, but that's a phrase that's used in the African-American community. Skinning and grinning is when you're just, putting on this face and smiling and acting like everything is okay. It doesn't happen with these people. They're serious. They're doing what they need to do. And again, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have within you strength, the patience, and the passion. Strength, patience, and passion to reach for the stars to change the world. And if you don't know that, it was very much a part of the escape route to use the stars to figure out where you were and where you needed to go next. And so there are songs like Follow the Drinking Gourd and books Follow the Drinking Gourd that talk about and signal and signify place, time, and location, and also give information about where you are and where you should go next. So songs were used honoring Harriet Tubman, and you can see the front and the back, and the detail is just amazing in that. So beautiful, the journey to freedom. I already talked about how she was hit in the head with the 2-pound weight, and thus the turban a lot of times when you see her. And there are also discrepancies in the research about how many trips she made and how many people she led to freedom. So you'll hear 700, 300, all kinds of different numbers. And again, who knows what's accurate. But according to some information that I used from, I believe this came from her biography, Tubman made 19 trips north and helped to free 300 plus people, many of whom were her family members. So she was very focused on making sure that her family members had the opportunity to get to freedom. And she had some that, a couple of her brothers, she was trying to bring them, and then they kind of like chickened out at the last minute. And a lot of the accounts that they call her, Moses, because she was leading people to freedom. But they also said she toted a gun, and she didn't play on the trip because it was so dangerous. If people were making noise or they were, sick or they wanted to cry out or argue or anything like that, she took authority and brought them into subjection, or she got them out of the crowd, okay? And think about traveling with children and babies and the kinds of strategies that she had to come up and use to make sure that they would be safe and they wouldn't be heard or seen, mostly traveling at night. So she's known as Moses. Other facts and things that she did, she recruited people for John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. So she was involved. She was a contemporary and also hooked up with John Brown at some point. And if you don't know, there's a historical home. John Brown's home is in Akron, Ohio as well. So Akron is known for that. But she was a recruiter to help get people to be a part of the raid. She led the first female-led armed expedition. I told you she was toting guns. In the war, guiding the Combahee River raid, which liberated more than 700 slaves in South Carolina. Okay, so that was a raid liberating slaves. And then another amazing fact that I'm still waiting to be manifested is in 2016, the U.S. Department of the Treasury announced that she would replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. And we all got so excited, and then they tabled it. So according to the articles that I read, it's supposed to be reactivated again in 2026. I don't know exactly what happened, but that's a long time to wait when we were all excited. Okay, so hopefully that will come to pass, And we'll wait and see. But it's still an amazing fact, even that they voted and said they were going to do it. I'm waiting for it to happen. All right. Other vocations, in addition to her, I just want to say, Harriet Tubman was all about covert operations. She was organizing people. She had weapons. She was traveling at night. So whereas we see Sojourner Truth out front and center, preaching and teaching and going about with the support of people behind her, this is in contrast, but she still turned out in later life to be a suffragette, so she joined that movement. She was a Union Army cook. She was a Union Army nurse. She was a spy during the war because she was good at that. She had already figured out how to travel at night and get into places without being seen and found. And she also founded a home for the elderly that she eventually ended up living in her later years before she passed away. I'm leaving that up there just for a minute. Look at all those jobs. That's deep. Harriet Tubman. She died on March 10th, 1913 at the age of 93. And as I said, that was in that home that she had founded for others to help care for them. She became a resident there and passed away. There are many schools named after Harriet Tubman around the country. And there have been several movies about her, of course, two prominent ones. In 1978, the movie A Woman Called Moses commemorated her life and career. And then in 2019, a more updated version that I know a lot of younger people and teens saw called Harriet. And it chronicled her life as a conductor for the Underground Railroad. Now, some of those have been a little bit commercialized and don't actually hold to I'm not saying they're not telling the truth, but it's been a little bit embellished maybe. So you want to go back to the original documents to actually find out a little bit more about her. But I love her so much because, like I said, she was so brave and courageous. When I think about her moving at night and actually doing this more than a few times because she was so committed to doing that and literally risking her life because she became a wanted person because she kept doing this, and she was actually freeing slaves, and that was during the time when they had the Fugitive Slave Act, where even though people had escaped to slavery, there were bounty hunters who made their living by recapturing slaves and bringing them back into captivity, and that's kind of upsetting to think about. So she was probably number one on the most wanted list for that. And so those are two women of valor, two women of noteworthy prominence in American history, and especially because of the way that they got their start in life, which was very traumatic. And so I encourage you to find additional information out about these women and to go and find these documentaries and watch them so that you can see and hear and listen and understand more about their lives. Does anybody have any questions or comments about Harriet Tubman or Sojourner? Yes.
I'm coming down.
Are there historic books written?
Right.
Or,
so biography.com, a lot of it, but then also Sojourner Truth has her autobiography that you can still read. And then there are many biographies about their lives, of course. So I just kind of pulled from different biographies and different sources online. But I mean, if you just Google them, you'll find a plethora of information about them. And a lot of it you can cross-reference is the same, but again, some of it's different because like I told you, some accounts, telling what the total number of slaves, so you have a variety of sources. But there's plenty of good stuff out there and also plenty of biographies about their lives as well. Yes.
I've been to her museum in Dorchester, Maryland, and perhaps that's a trip we should make too.
Oh, now we're going to Maryland too. Yes, I forgot to mention that, but some of the photos, I thought I had a picture of that on there, but maybe I didn't. Let me see. Oh, I don't think the picture came up. Maybe I didn't put it in there, but I did have a picture. I think I might have taken it back out. I did have a picture of the museum in Maryland because there are several busts of her there, and there's a very just touching picture of her where she's kind of reaching out toward people, and it's very moving. So if you get a chance to look that up, please do so. Anything else?
Regarding Sojourner Truth, I'm embarrassed to say I was raised and educated in the South. I've never heard of her. I've never heard of her.
Wow.
And I don't know if you're educated in the North, maybe you might have, but this is all new to me.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And don't be embarrassed. That's why we're doing this. You know, and I'm glad we're doing this because as I said before, there hasn't been a lot that's been shared, and we hope that, you know, that's changing. But then we also know there's opposing forces toward that right now. So, you know, self-study is great. And this kind of, you know, I applaud all of you for choosing to do this, and especially during your Sunday school time, because guess what? This is American history, and this is the history of Christianity as well. When we look at individuals and how they are understanding who God is and how they're applying his principles in their daily lives, that's what we're supposed to be doing. So this is relevant, and I love studying the scriptures and all of those things as well. But this is good. So thank you for allowing this space and this time for us to come together to talk and share and learn. And again, it's all about learning about the people. And Pastor Mike said this, but also how can we take something that we've learned about them and from them and apply it to our own lives and make a difference in our own circles. Anybody else? Okay, that's all I have. Thank you for being here. And I appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to coming back again.